There is a particular kind of silence that only exists in a house where everyone knows the truth. But no one is allowed to say it. Not the silence of empty rooms or sleeping children. Not the silence of winter mornings before the birds begin. This is something older and heavier. The kind of silence that presses down on the chest, that follows a person from room to room like a second shadow. But we are not starting with the silence. We are starting with the woman. In 1847, on a working cotton plantation 12 miles southeast of Natchez, Mississippi, a woman named Nora was given an order that would quietly reshape the lives of every single person on that property for the next 2 decades. She was told to care for 2 children, to feed them, bathe them, sing to them, and keep them alive. She was told this not as a request. She was told this the way a man tells a plow horse which field to work. What no one understood in that moment, not the overseers, not the neighboring families who came to dine on Sundays, not the minister who blessed the house each Christmas, was the exact nature of what was being asked of her. They would not understand it for years. And when the understanding finally came, when the letters were opened and the documents were laid bare on a courthouse table in the summer of 1866, the men who read them went quiet in a way that the witnesses in that room never forgot. One of them, a federal records clerk named Douglas Peel, wrote about it in a personal letter that survived among his family's papers. He described the moment as the slow collapse of something you had always believed was solid. Like pressing your hand against a wall and finding it has no other side. This is the story of Nora, of a plantation called Grayfield, and of 2 children who were raised inside a lie so carefully constructed that even they could not see it from the inside. This is the story of what Edmund Hale did, and what it cost everyone around him. And this is the story of how the truth, in the end, does not stay buried, no matter how many years of silence are poured on top of it. Stay with us. Edmund Hale arrived in Adams County, Mississippi in the spring of 1841. He was 26 years old. He carried a letter of introduction from his father's lawyer in Charleston, South Carolina, and enough capital to purchase land and begin a modest cotton operation. He was not, by any account, a man who inspired immediate trust. Neighbors who met him in those early years described him later, in the depositions that would be collected 2 decades on, in curiously similar terms: composed, deliberate, never quite at ease. One woman, the wife of a neighboring planter, noted in a diary entry from 1842 that she found Edmund Hale to be a man who weighs his words before he speaks them and watches you while you hear them, to know if they have landed where he intended. He was not cruel in the way that some men were cruel, loud, impulsive, theatrical in their brutality. He was something quieter, and in certain ways, more difficult to name. He made decisions the way a chess player makes decisions, with a calculation that preceded the move, by a great deal of invisible thought, and with a studied indifference to the suffering of whatever piece had been sacrificed. He purchased his land, 412 acres of rich alluvial soil between 2 creeks, in March of 1841, from the estate of a deceased planter whose family had defaulted on decades of accumulated debt. Edmund paid less than the land was worth. He knew it. The sellers knew it. But the terms had been set by the court, and there was nothing to be done. He renamed the property Grayfield, a name that suited it perfectly. Not gray in the sense of despair, but gray in the sense of a sky that has not yet decided whether to give sun or storm. He built the main house over the course of that first year and part of the second, a 2-story structure with a wide front gallery and 4 tall columns that announced the property's aspirations without quite fulfilling them, large enough to suggest prosperity. restrained enough to suggest caution. Edmund Hale never built anything for pleasure. He built things to be used. By 1843, Grayfield had 31 enslaved people working the cotton fields and the domestic operations of the house. Edmund had purchased most of them at auction in Natchez, that city which held, in those years, some of the most active slave markets in the entire South. He was not wasteful in these purchases. He studied the listings the way he studied everything. Methodically, without sentiment, looking for specific qualities that served his specific needs. Among those he purchased in 1843 was a woman named Nora. She was 22 years old. She had been brought to Natchez from a tobacco plantation in Virginia, part of a larger lot sold when that operation went into bankruptcy. The auctioneer's notes, which would later become part of the documentary record, described her as healthy, of sound constitution, skilled in domestic labor, reported to read and write. That last detail was unusual enough that Edmund Hale underlined it in the listing. He paid significantly above the average price for her. What the listing did not describe, because such things were not listed, was the person inside the fact. It did not say that Nora had a memory like a trap, that she remembered faces, words, and the precise sequence of events with an accuracy that sometimes unsettled the people around her. It did not say that she was observant in the deep lateral way that people become observant when their survival depends on reading a room before they enter it. It did not say that she had, at the Virginia plantation, quietly learned to read, not from anyone's permission, but from proximity, from watching the children of the house do their lessons while she worked nearby, from borrowing books left on tables and returning them before they were missed. Edmund Hale did not know all of this when he purchased her, but he sensed enough of it to know she was the kind of person who was useful to keep close. She was assigned to the main house. In the fall of 1843, Edmund Hale married a woman named Clara Weston, the third daughter of a poor but well-regarded family from Port Gibson. Clara was 20 years old, small frame, with dark eyes and a quiet manner that the county social circuit occasionally mistook for shyness, but was in reality something more guarded. She had grown up in a house where money was discussed in worried tones behind closed doors, and she had learned, as such children do, to read the emotional weather of a room with considerable skill. She and Edmund were not, in the way the word is typically used, a love match. The arrangement suited both families. Edmund needed a wife of respectable family to anchor his social position in Adams County society. Clara's family needed the financial security that marriage to a rising planter offered. These were not uncommon terms for the time and place. What was perhaps less common was the degree to which both Edmund and Clara understood those terms with the same clear eyes, and never pretended otherwise. Clara moved into Grayfield in November of 1843. She and Nora met on the day of Clara's arrival. Clara had been brought from the carriage into the main hall, where the household staff had been assembled to receive her. She walked down the line of faces in the way that new mistresses did, briefly, assessingly, with the particular performance of authority that the occasion required. She paused at Nora longer than at the others. Not in hostility, in recognition of something she did not yet have words for. "You're Nora," Clara said. It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am." Clara looked at her for a moment, then moved on. But that evening, she asked the housekeeper, Ruth, about Nora. Ruth said she was skilled, quiet, and that Mr. Hale kept her on light indoor work. Clara noted this. She noted most things. The first 2 years of the marriage at Grayfield were, by outward measure, ordinary. Then, in the spring of 1845, Clara became pregnant for the first time. She lost the child at 4 months. In the fall of the same year, she became pregnant again. She lost that child at 6 months. The second loss was harder. Edmund received the news in his study and did not speak about it. The doctor, a man named Ambrose Vickers, told Clara there was no medical reason necessarily for the losses, and that many women went on to deliver healthy children. He said this with the practiced cheerfulness of a man who understood that his patient needed hope more than precision. Clara received it with the polite nodding of a woman who had heard words offered as comfort before and had learned to let them pass through without holding on. Something changed in Clara after that second loss. Something hardened, as if a door she had kept slightly open had now been pulled to. Without being fully latched, Nora noticed. She was the kind of person who noticed. In the spring of 1847, Clara Hale became pregnant for the third time. By this point, the entire household understood, without it needing to be said, that the matter was fragile. Edmund, who ordinarily gave emotional events the consideration he gave changes in the weather, was observed by several people to be unusually attentive during this pregnancy. He reduced Clara's social obligations. He asked Dr. Vickers to make regular visits to the house. He made it known that Nora was to attend to Clara personally and without interruption. Clara did not ask for this attention. She did not appear to want it. But she accepted the arrangements without comment, in the way that she accepted most things Edmund decided. It was during this period, the late spring and early summer of 1847, that the thing happened. The thing that would not be understood for many years. The thing that would, when it finally came to be understood, rewrite the history of everything that followed. We are not going to tell you what it was yet, because that is not how Nora lived it. She did not live it as a revelation. She lived it as something that arrived in the dark, without ceremony, without witness, and without recourse. What the evidence later indicates, and what the testimony of two women named Hattie and Lou makes considerably more than a mere indication, is that Edmund Hale had, over the course of the winter of 1846 and the spring of 1847, made it known to Nora that she was required to submit to him. Hattie testified that Nora had confided this to her in fragments over weeks, in the way that people speak about things that have no safe language. Lou testified that she had herself witnessed Edmund Hale enter and leave the small room adjacent to the kitchen where Nora slept on multiple occasions, during the hours after the main house had gone dark. Neither woman was asked to elaborate beyond this. Neither offered more than was needed. The bureau agent who conducted the interviews, a man named Patrick Corbin, whose notes still exist in the Mississippi Freedmen's Bureau records held in Washington, wrote in his summary that both women spoke with the calm precision of people recounting facts they have lived with for a long time and are relieved at last to be able to speak. In March of 1847, before Clara's condition was widely known, a woman also came to be with child on the Grayfield plantation. She was 26 years old. Her name was Nora. Now hold that. Two women on the same plantation, both pregnant at the same time. One the wife of the master, one the woman he had quietly destroyed, and the man who knew both truths simultaneously, going about his daily business, reviewing his accounts, attending church. What happens next is the part of this story that is hardest to hold in the mind directly, because it requires understanding a logic that was not unusual in its time and place. However monstrous it appears from any other angle, Clara Hale was delivered of a child 3 weeks before Nora. A daughter, alive and healthy, the first child she had carried to term. The relief in the main house was considerable. Edmund received the news with what several people described as an unusual display of feeling. Not joy exactly, but something closer to the satisfaction of a man who has finally resolved a problem that has occupied him for some time. But Clara's delivery had been dangerous. Dr. Vickers had managed it through a difficult night, and in the weeks of her recovery, she was pale, she ate poorly, and her body was not cooperating with feeding the infant. 3 weeks later, Nora delivered her children, alone in the dark, with only Hattie beside her. Not one child, 2 twins. The boy was delivered first, then the girl. By morning, the boy was gone from the room. Hattie's testimony about this moment is among the most precise passages in the entire Freedmen's Bureau record. She asked me where he was. I couldn't look at her. I said Mr. Hale had come in the night. She asked me what he had done. I told her he had taken the boy to the main house. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she asked if the girl was still there. I said yes. She held the girl against her, and she didn't speak again until the afternoon. By the following Sunday, it was publicly known in the main house that Clara Hale had delivered not one child, but 2. A girl, Josephine, born in early October, and a boy, Henry, whom she had delivered, it was said, in a second labor 3 weeks later, which had been kept quiet for fear of the outcome. Dr. Vickers signed the documentation. Whether he believed what he signed, or whether he understood the transaction he was participating in, or whether he told himself a version of events that allowed him to complete the paperwork without examining it too closely. None of this is recorded. He died in 1859 before any of it came to light and took whatever he knew with him. What the records say is this: Henry and Josephine Hale, twins, born to Edmund and Clara Hale, October 1847, Grayfield Plantation, Adams County, Mississippi. One line. An erasure of everything true. Now understand what Nora was left with. Her son taken in the night. His name written in a ledger that did not contain hers. Her daughter, a girl she would name Pearl, left with her, but left in the quarters. Left at a distance Edmund did not bother to close. And then, 18 months later, Clara Hale died of a fever, January 1849, leaving behind 2 children, one of whom was hers and one of whom was not. And she had spent 15 months apparently knowing the difference, holding Josephine more readily, nursing her more willingly, while she watched Henry with something that observers described, casually and cruelly, as ordinary maternal preference for one child over another. What was actually happening in Clara Hale's mind during those 15 months is not recoverable, but it is worth sitting with, even for a moment, before the story moves on. On the morning of January 29, 1849, 9 days after Clara's death, Edmund Hale summoned Nora to his study. He told her she would now be responsible for the care of the children. She would move from the servants' room to the upper floor of the main house. She would be with them during the day and available at night. She would manage their feeding, their clothing, their early learning. She would answer to him and to no one else on matters pertaining to the children. What she said in return was not witnessed. There is no record. What the record contains is what happened afterward. Nora moved to the upper floor. She came every morning to the nursery before dawn. She dressed them. She fed them. She carried them through the house and the galleries in the long afternoons, when the light turned the cotton fields a heavy gold. She sang to them in the evenings, songs that the children would remember in one form or another for the rest of their lives, without ever knowing why those particular melodies seemed to carry something in them that other songs did not. Josephine, the girl, had eyes the color of deep water. Henry, the boy, had a laugh that started silently and built slowly, like something warming from the inside. They were different in almost every particular. She quiet and watchful, he easy and loud. and in this, they perhaps resembled the complicated inheritance of the thing they were, though no one at Greyfield named this resemblance, not even to themselves. Every day, Nora bathed them and fed them, and held them when they were frightened of storms. Every day, she sat beside their beds when they were sick. Every day, she taught Josephine the names of the birds outside the nursery window, the names of the wildflowers along the eastern fence, the particular way you fold a pie crust at the edge so that it holds. Every day, she looked at her son's face and could not say his name the way a mother says it. Every day, and Pearl, her daughter, her own girl, the twin who had not been taken, grew up 200 yards away in the quarters, cared for by Hattie and Lou, when Nora was in the main house, which was almost always. Pearl was not allowed in the main house. Edmund made no formal announcement of this rule. It was simply understood, in the way that the rules of Greyfield were generally understood, not spoken, but as absolutely present as the walls of the building itself. Nora saw Pearl in the evenings, during the hours between supper and dark. She watched her daughter grow in the way that people watch things from a distance. Able to see the shape, unable to touch it, she raised Edmund Hale's children. She raised her own blood. She could not say so. It was in 1853 that Josephine, now 6 years old, first saw Pearl. Josephine had slipped out from the main house without telling anyone. She had learned which floorboards don't creak, and gone to find Nora in the quarters. She found her in the doorway of Hattie's house, holding a small girl who had cut her hand on a piece of fence wire. Nora was wrapping the hand in a strip of cloth. The small girl was very still, watching Nora's face rather than her own hand, the way children watch the person they trust when something hurts. Josephine stopped at the edge of the yard. She looked at the small girl for a long time. Then she looked at Nora. Nora saw her. Something moved across Nora's face. Something that passed quickly, but not before Josephine caught it. Josephine was 6 years old and had been watching Nora's face for all of her 6 years. She caught it the way you catch a sound that was not supposed to carry. "Who is she?" Josephine asked. "Her name is Pearl," Nora said. "She got hurt. I'm fixing it. Does she belong to this place?"
"Yes."
Josephine looked at Pearl again. Pearl looked back, with the direct, unsentimental gaze of a child who has learned early that the world requires looking at straight. "She looks like you," Josephine said. Nora did not answer. That evening, Josephine told Henry about Pearl. Henry asked questions. How old was she? Where did she live? Who were her parents? Josephine said she didn't know. Henry said they should find out. Josephine said nothing. She was 6 years old, but she had already, in some way she could not name, begun to understand that there were things at Greyfield that answered to a different set of rules than the ones she had been told. The years between 1849 and the early 1860s moved forward at Greyfield with the slow gravity of a decade that did not know what was coming for it. Edmund Hale ran his plantation, expanded it modestly, and maintained the social and professional life of a prosperous county planter. He attended church. He sat on the county agricultural committee. He was the kind of man who exists in the middle distances of history, present in the documents, but rarely at the center of anything. Henry and Josephine grew up. The tutor Edmund eventually hired from New Orleans, a Frenchman named Gaston Pearly, wrote to a colleague in 1856 that his two pupils at Greyfield were the most curious children I have taught, not in their academic performance, which is satisfactory, but in their manner, which is that of people who have learned to read the room before they enter it. He did not know he was describing, in both of them, the quality they had inherited from their mother. In 1855, Edmund sent Henry away to school in Nashville. Henry was 8 years old. The night before he left, he came to find Nora in the kitchen. She was banking the fire for the night, the kind of low automatic task that the hands do while the mind is somewhere else entirely. Henry sat on the stool by the back door and watched her. He was already tall for his age, with a serious face that got more serious when he was feeling something he didn't know how to say. "Will you remember what I look like?" he asked her. Nora set down the iron poker and turned around. "I'll remember," she said. "You sure?" "I have not forgotten a single face in my life," she said. "Not one." Henry nodded. He wanted to say something else, but he didn't. After a moment, he got up and went back inside. Nora stood in the kitchen for a long time after that. With Henry gone, Josephine grew through those years of her father's hovering proximity into a young woman who was, by near universal account, difficult to read, not cold, not unkind, something more peculiar. She was exceptionally composed for someone who was clearly feeling a great deal, and she had the quality, rare in a girl of 12, 13, 14, of listening to a conversation with her full attention while also visibly processing something that had nothing to do with what was being said. She spent those years in close and constant proximity to Nora. In the evenings, in the kitchen, in the upper hallway, she asked questions about Virginia, about the people there, about what Nora's mother had been like, whether she remembered her, about Pearl, slowly, over months, never all at once, adding a question here and a question there with the patient lateral manner of someone doing a puzzle without the picture on the box. Nora answered carefully. She had been careful for so long that carefulness had become the default setting of everything she did. Not fearfulness, but precision. The precision of someone who has spent years measuring exactly how much truth is safe to speak. She told Josephine that her mother had been a woman who noticed things, that she had a memory for faces and names and the exact sequence of events, that she had passed this quality on, to whom she did not say. Josephine held this. In the summer of 1858, Josephine came to the quarters deliberately. She had waited for an afternoon when Edmund was in Natchez. She told the housekeeper she was going to walk the eastern fence line, and walked instead to Pearl. Pearl was sitting in the yard of Hattie's house, sorting dried beans into a bowl. She looked up when Josephine came around the corner and did not startle. She simply looked, with the direct, unafraid eyes that had struck Josephine the first time she saw them 5 years earlier. Josephine sat down in the yard without being invited. "I'm Josephine," she said. "I know who you are," Pearl said. "I know you live in the main house. I know your name. I know Nora takes care of you." Josephine looked at her. "Nora takes care of you too." Pearl set the bowl of beans down slowly. "She's not supposed to tell anyone that." "She didn't tell me. I figured it out." Pearl looked at her for a long time. Then she picked up the beans again and went on sorting. "What else did you figure out?" Pearl asked. Josephine watched Pearl's hands, small and deft and quick, moving through the beans, pulling the soft ones out and setting them aside. "I don't know yet," Josephine said finally. "That's why I came." Henry Hale came back from Nashville in 1859, 18 years old, educated in the ways that Southern schools in that period educated their students. He was not, however, what the school had expected to produce. He had come home different. Edmund noticed immediately and regarded the change with the focused, controlled concern of a man who sees a variable he had not planned for. Henry asked questions he had not asked before, not about efficiency and production, but about individuals. Names, histories, where people had come from. Edmund told him to talk to the overseer. Henry talked to the overseer, and then to Ruth, and then, quietly, to Nora. What passed between Henry and Nora in those conversations of the fall and winter of 1859 is not directly recorded. The fragments suggest a series of conversations that moved slowly over weeks from the general to the specific, arriving finally somewhere that neither of them had announced as the destination, but that both of them perhaps had understood was where they were going. Henry was 18. He had heard things at school. He had read things. He had arrived at a set of questions about his own life that he did not yet know how to address directly. The question he could not stop returning to's, why did Nora look at him the way she did? It was not accusation. It was not resentment. It was not even the tenderness of genuine maternal feeling expressed freely. It was something more compressed, like a feeling that had been folded in on itself so many times that it had become very small and very dense. And what you saw of it was only the shape of something whose full size you couldn't measure. He began to pay attention to Pearl. She was 11 that fall, sharp, self-contained, with a stillness that dropped over her when she was thinking, making her look momentarily much older than she was. Henry had known she existed. He had known all the people on Grayfield by name, but he had not looked at her closely until that fall. When he looked at her closely, something shifted in his chest that he could not explain. He wrote about it in his journal, in a single oblique sentence that has been preserved. There is a girl in the quarters named Pearl whose face I find I cannot stop thinking about. Not from any sentiment of that kind, but from the feeling that I am looking at something I have seen before in a different place. He did not write what came next. Or if he did, those pages are gone. By 1860, the political situation in Mississippi was consuming the attention of every man with anything to lose. Edmund was not a man of strong political passion, but he understood threat assessment. And by the mid-1850s, he had assessed that the threat was real. He wrote a letter to his brother in Charleston in January 1861, which survives, in which he said, "I have never believed that what is right is always what is wise. But in this instance, I find that neither condition has been satisfied. We are walking into a fire because certain men have convinced us the fire will not burn us." He went nonetheless. He sent Henry, who went in the second year of the war as a commissioned officer in the Confederate infantry, because there was no other option that did not carry consequences worse than going. And at Grayfield, the household contracted around the remaining people, Edmund, Josephine, Nora, and the reduced domestic staff that remained when the war took what it wanted. It was during the war years that the relationship between Josephine and Pearl ceased to be the careful negotiated thing it had been throughout their childhood and became something more direct. With Edmund spending more time in Natchez, with the overseer gone to the war, with the strict architecture of every boundary becoming harder to sustain with its previous rigor, Pearl began to come into the kitchen of the main house, not because she was invited, because she came, and Nora, who was the person there to see her come, did not send her away. In the spring of 1863, with the Union Army advancing through the Mississippi River corridor, Edmund Hale made a decision that revealed something about the nature of the man that peacetime had kept partially concealed. He moved his documents, not out of Mississippi. He was not yet ready to believe the situation was that irreversible, but he moved them from the main house to the overseer's cabin at the far edge of the property. The ledgers, the land records, the deed papers, the correspondence with his lawyers, the financial instruments, and something else, a bundle of letters, brown, edged and bound with a piece of twine, that he had kept for 16 years. He did this himself over 2 days in March. He told no one what he was doing or where things had been taken. He locked the overseer's cabin and kept the key. Now pay attention to this next part. Edmund had developed in his middle age the habit of keeping his keys on a ring in his right coat pocket. This was known to everyone at Greyfield. The way personal habits of people in authority become known to the people around them through constant proximity and the need to know. In August of 1863, Edmund Hale fell ill. Not catastrophically, a fever that confined him to his room for 9 days. During those 9 days, his coat was on the chair. Nora entered the room twice a day to bring food, change linens, and manage the sick room. On the 5th day, when she came to collect the breakfast tray, she found the key ring on the floor beside the chair. She picked it up. She set it on the table beside the bed within Edmund's reach. She did not look at the keys for longer than the moment of the action. But Pearl, who had been in the hallway when Nora came out of the room, had seen the keys in Nora's hands for the brief moment before they were replaced. And Pearl, who had the memory for faces and names and the precise sequence of events that she had inherited without knowing it, had noted the shape of the ring and the number of keys on it. And Pearl, who had grown up on this property and knew every building on it, including the overseer's cabin that had been shut and locked since March, had understood something. She waited 11 days. She was 16 years old. She had learned from whoever raised her that patience was preparation. On a September afternoon, when Edmund had recovered and gone to Natchez, Pearl went to the overseer's cabin. The door was locked, but the window on the north side had a latch that had never worked properly. Pearl had known this since she was 12, because she had once hidden in that cabin during a thunderstorm. She got in through that window now. She found the documents. She looked through the ledgers quickly. She looked through the deed papers. She looked through a stack of letters, brown-edged, bound with twine, that she untied carefully and retied when she was done. The letters were from Dr. Ambrose Vickers. There were 9 of them, spanning the years 1847 to 1853. Pearl read the first 3 before she understood what she was reading. She read all 9 before she put them down. She tied the twine back around them with the same careful knot it had been in before. She climbed out the north window. She walked back to the quarters. She sat down on the step of Hattie's house in the September afternoon light and did not speak for a long time. Hattie came to the door and saw her sitting there. "What happened?" she asked. Pearl looked up at her. "I think," she said slowly, "I need to talk to Nora. This is the moment. You can feel it." That particular September afternoon in 1863, in a small house at the edge of a Mississippi plantation, when a 16-year-old girl sat down with what she knew. The conversation between Pearl and Nora happened that evening, in the small room adjacent to the kitchen, the room that had been Nora's for 20 years. So close to the main house that you could hear, on quiet nights, the creak of the floorboard at the top of the stairs. Pearl sat on the stool. Nora sat on the edge of her cot. They were in lamplight, the room very small around them. Pearl told her what she had read. She told her about the letters, about the dates, about what Dr. Vickers had written. She did not have the letters with her. She had put them back exactly as she had found them, because she was 16 years old and was already thinking several moves ahead. But she had the memory of them, and she laid it out in the patient, orderly way she had of presenting things she had already fully organized in her mind. When Pearl finished speaking, Nora was very still. The lamp threw its light across the wall. Outside in the quarters, a man was playing a low, repetitive figure on a banjo. Barely audible, more felt than heard. "How long have you known?" Pearl asked. Nora was quiet for a moment. "I have known since the beginning," she said. Pearl looked at her. Did they know? Henry and Josephine?
No, don't.
Does Josephine suspect something? Nora considered this. She suspects there is something to know. She has suspected that for years. But she does not know what the something is. Pearl was quiet for a moment. Then what are we going to do? We are not going to do anything yet. We are going to be careful. The war changes things. Nora agreed. But it doesn't change what is safe and what isn't. Not yet. Pearl looked at her hands. Those letters, if someone who knew what to do with them read them.
Yes.
So we need to keep them where they are. Until we know more, Nora said. Pearl looked up. She looked at Nora's face in the lamplight. The face she had been looking at for her entire life. The face she had always read more easily than most. Understanding by now something about why. Why didn't you ever tell me? Pearl asked. The question was simple and enormous. Nora held it for a moment before she answered. Because telling you would have made you carry it. You were a child. I was not going to put that weight on a child. I'm not a child now. No, Nora said. You're not. Pearl was quiet. The banjo in the quarters had stopped. The night was very still. I'm angry, Pearl said finally. Not loudly. The way you say something true.
I know.
At him.
Wes, not at you.
Nora did not say anything. She reached across the small space between them and took Pearl's hand and held it. That was the whole of what was possible in that moment. In that room. In that world. It was not enough. It had never been enough. But it was what there was. And Nora held it with the same careful, deliberate grip with which she had held everything that mattered, and was not allowed to be held openly. Henry Hale came home from the war in the spring of 1865. He came home changed in the way that men come home from wars that lasted 4 years and ended in defeat. Carrying something inside him that had no name in ordinary conversation. He was 24 years old. He had been at Shiloh, at Vicksburg, at the fall of Atlanta. He had done all of this as a junior officer in an army that was, by 1864, fighting a war it could not win against a clock that was running down. He arrived at Grayfield on a Thursday morning in April, 2 weeks after Appomattox. Edmund was on the gallery when Henry came up the road. They looked at each other across the distance, and then Edmund walked down, and they stood together for a moment before going inside. Henry found Nora in the kitchen. She turned from the stove when she heard him come in, and she looked at him with the same expression he had been trying to describe to himself for 5 years. That compressed, pressurized look. That surface that contained too much for the surface it occupied. He thought, not for the first time, that he needed to understand what that expression meant. You're home, she said. I'm home, he said. He sat down at the kitchen table, the way he had sat at it as a boy, because some things the body remembers regardless of what the years have done to the rest of you. Is everyone here? Pearl is here, she said. Hattie and Lude, he nodded. And Josephine. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Nora, I have some things I need to ask you. Nora turned back to the stove. Right. Not yet, he said. When there's time. When there's room for it. There will be time, she said. The emancipation had come formally to Mississippi with the end of the war. The legal structure that had organized Grayfield for 24 years dissolved in those weeks, and in its dissolution produced something that was not immediately freedom. Because the systems and dependencies and arrangements of the plantation did not dissolve as rapidly as the legal text. But it was, for the first time, a situation with different possibilities than the one that had existed the day before. What the change produced at Grayfield in the immediate term was a kind of suspended uncertainty. Edmund Hale, who had built his entire life around the management of exactly this property, And exactly this operation found himself at 60 years old in a situation that no amount of calculated patience had prepared him for. He was not a man who showed fear, but he was, for the first time in anyone's memory on the property, a man who did not appear to know what move to make. In the summer of 1865, a Freedmen's Bureau office opened in Natchez. Pearl heard about it from a man named Dawson, who was traveling through Adams County that summer, visiting the plantations and explaining to the newly freed people what the Bureau was and what it could do. Pearl was 18. She went to Natchez in September. She told Nora. Nora said, "Be careful, come back before dark." At the Bureau office, Pearl met the agent named Patrick Corbin. She told him what she knew, not everything, not in that first meeting. She told him enough to establish that she had information that bore on the legal history of a specific property in Adams County, and that this information might be relevant to questions of inheritance and documentation. Corbin was a man of about 35 from Vermont, with the careful, deliberate manner of someone who had been trained as a lawyer before the war and had taken this posting because he believed the work mattered. He listened to Pearl with full attention. He asked her to come back. She came back 4 times over the next 6 months, each time with more detail, building toward the full account. Hattie and Lou gave their testimony in January 1866. Henry, who had by this point had several of those long, delayed conversations with Nora that they had both been approaching since his return, gave his own account in the spring of 1866. Henry's account is the most extraordinary document in the record. Not because it is the most detailed. Hattie and Lou are more specific, and Pearl is the most organized, but because of who is giving it, and what it cost him, and what it means. He sat in Patrick Corbin's office in Natchez on a Tuesday morning in April 1866, and he told the truth about what he had come to understand about his own life. He said, "I believe that the woman named Nora, who was enslaved at the Grayfield plantation owned by my father Edmund Hale, is my mother, and Pearl's, and that Josephine's mother is the same." He said, "I believe that what was represented to the county, and to Clara Hale, and to the 2 of us for all of our lives was a fabrication, and that the documents in the overseer's cabin at Grayfield, which I have now examined with my own eyes, support this." Corbin wrote this down in his precise, careful hand. "How long have you known this?" he asked Henry. Henry was quiet for a moment. "I've suspected it since I was 18, he said. "I think I've known it, in the way of knowing things you can't say, since I was a child." The summer of 1866 produced the confrontation that the preceding 20 years had been building toward. Slowly, incrementally, in the way that things build, when the pressure has nowhere to go but continues to accumulate. Edmund Hale was summoned to the Natchez courthouse in June of 1866. The Freedmen's Bureau did not have criminal jurisdiction over the events in question. The legal landscape was complicated, but the Bureau had the capacity to compel testimony, to collect and register documents, and to create a formal record that would exist in the Federal Archive. Edmund came to the courthouse. He was 61 years old, thinner than he had been, with the controlled, opaque expression that had characterized him in every room of his life. He sat across a table from Patrick Corbin and 2 other Bureau officials, and he was shown the letters from Dr. Vickers. He read them without visible reaction. Corbin asked him to explain the contents. Edmund was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "De Degre." Vickers was not always precise in his language. Corbin set down the 3rd letter, the one dated November 2nd, 1847, with the passage that left almost nothing to interpretation, and looked at Edmund. "Mr. Hale," he said, "I want to be direct with you about what we're doing here and why. Edmund looked at him. "The people named in these documents have given testimony," Corbin said. "The record we are assembling is not a criminal proceeding, but it is a federal record, and it will stand. What we are asking you today is whether you wish to contribute to it, or whether you prefer to leave it as it is." Edmund said nothing for a moment. He looked at the letters on the table. He had kept those letters for 19 years in a locked cabin on his property, and it must have occurred to him in that moment, as it must have occurred to him when Pearl found the window, that keeping a thing is not the same as securing it, that a thing locked in a cabin is still a thing in the world, still a thing that can be reached. He said, "I would like to speak to a lawyer." He was entitled to do this, and he was allowed to do this, and the session concluded. Edmund Hale died in January of 1867 before any further legal action was taken. He died at Grayfield in the room where he had slept for 26 years, with the controlled quietness that had characterized everything else about him. He left no confession. He left no letter of explanation to his children. He left a will that divided the property between Henry and Josephine in equal shares. He left nothing to Pearl. This omission would itself become part of the record. In the fall of 1866, after the courthouse and before Edmund's death, Nora gave her testimony to Patrick Corbin. She came to Natchez alone. She arrived at the bureau office on a Tuesday morning in October. The same quality of light over the river, the same particular smell of the Mississippi autumn, which is not a sad smell exactly, but is a heavy one, layered with the residue of seasons. She sat in the chair across from Corbin's desk. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked at him with the calm, measuring attention she had always had, and that 19 years of practice had made almost perfect. She spoke for 3 hours. She told him about Virginia and the tobacco plantation, and the auction in Natchez, and the first year at Grayfield. She told him about the winter of 1846 and the spring of 1847 with a precision that was painful, and that she delivered without flinching, because she had made a decision somewhere in the long years that when the time came to speak it, she would speak it fully. She told him about October 1847, about the delivery and the night that followed, about the morning when Henry was gone from the room. She told him about Pearl. She told him about the 19 years. Corbin wrote everything down. He was a careful man, and he was a good one, and he had been in this chair for a year, hearing testimony from people who had experienced things that the ordinary moral vocabulary of his upbringing had not prepared him to receive. And he had learned over that year to receive it with the full weight of attention it deserved. When Nora finished, he asked her one question. "In all of those years," he said, "was there ever a moment when you considered leaving? Leaving the property, leaving Natchez?" Nora looked at him. "Where would I have gone?" she said. It was not a rhetorical question. She was asking him specifically to understand the geography of the situation, to understand that freedom without resources, without documentation, in Mississippi in the 1850s was a theoretical category with almost no practical content, particularly for a woman with a daughter who could not be acknowledged and 2 other children she would not abandon. Corbin wrote it down. He wrote it exactly as she said it. Where would I have gone? The day after Nora gave her testimony, Henry came to find her. He found her in the kitchen at Grayfield, at the stove, her back to the door, her hands at work on whatever the morning required. He came in quietly. He sat down at the table. She turned around. He had been trying for a year to find the right words for this moment. He had turned it over in his mind, methodically, from multiple angles, looking for the approach that lost the fewest things in the crossing. He could not find the right words. He said, "I know, Nora looked at him.
I know.
He said again. I've known for a while. I should have found a way to. He stopped. He started again. I'm sorry that I was in that school, that I was away, that I didn't. You were a child, Nora said. Not always. For long enough, she said. He was looking at her with an expression she had never been allowed to see on him before. Because he had always been careful, as she had been careful, to keep the most direct things behind the forms that the world required. The expression was something simple and enormous, the look of a person who has spent years holding something at arm's length and has finally put it down. You raised us, he said.
Wes.
You raised us knowing.
Yes. Every day.
Every day. The kitchen was very still. Outside the window, the September light lay flat and gold on the cotton fields. What do you need? Henry asked her. Nora considered the question. It was perhaps the first time in 23 years that anyone had asked her that directly, in those words, and meant the full weight of them. I need Pearl recognized, she said. I need her share of this property in the record. I need it written down. Henry nodded. It will be, he said. I'll make sure of it. He meant it. He was in this, as in other things, his mother's son. Josephine had known something for a long time. She had known it through every conversation with Nora in the years after their first meeting, through every question she had asked and every careful answer she had received, through Pearl, through the particular resonance of Pearl's face, Pearl's eyes, the specific quality of Pearl's presence that had always felt to Josephine less like meeting a stranger and more like recognizing something. She had never said it. She had waited for a situation in which it could be said. That situation arrived in the fall of 1866, when Henry sat down with her in the small sitting room off the gallery, the room with the window that looked east toward the creek, and told her what he knew and how he knew it. Josephine listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I know. Henry looked at her. I've known for a while, she said. I kept waiting for someone to say it. No one was going to say it, Henry said. I know, she said. They sat together in the small sitting room for a while, without speaking. Outside, the creek moved in the late afternoon light, brown and quiet, the way it had moved every afternoon of both their lives. Pearl is our sister, Josephine said. Not as a question. Yes, she's known longer than we have. She didn't come to us with it, Josephine said. She let us find our own way to it. Henry thought about this. I think that was deliberate, he said. Of course it was deliberate, Josephine said. She's Nora's daughter. The formal recognition of Pearl's claims on the Grayfield property was achieved after considerable difficulty and over the course of several years. Through a combination of the Freedmen's Bureau record, Henry's direct legal advocacy, and the evidentiary weight of the vicar's letters, which were entered into the Federal Archive in the fall of 1866. It was not clean. It was not straightforward. The legal landscape of Reconstruction Mississippi was not a friendly environment for such claims, and the specific nature of the documentation, a collection of a dead doctor's letters and the testimony of formerly enslaved women, was not the kind of evidence that moved easily through the courts of that place and time. But the record existed. The record said what it said, and Henry, who had inherited his mother's quality of patient precision in the pursuit of a thing that mattered, did not stop. In the spring of 1871, Josephine came to visit Nora and Pearl at Grayfield. She had been living in Natchez since her marriage in 1869 to a quiet, serious man named Charles Delaney, a hardware merchant who had been told before the marriage all of the relevant history, because Josephine was not a person who entered arrangements without full disclosure. She came on a Saturday in April, when the air had the particular quality of Mississippi spring. Humid and warm and green, everything growing with the slightly excessive enthusiasm of a place that has had a long winter and is not inclined to waste the sun. She found Nora and Pearl in the yard behind the quarters house, doing the early garden work of that season. Turning the soil, setting the rows, working side by side, not talking, in the companionable quiet of people who have spent enough years together that silence between them is just another form of speech. Josephine came around the side of the house and stopped at the edge of the yard. She looked at them for a moment before they saw her. She looked at the two of them, working in the April light, and she saw in the set of the shoulders, in the angle of the heads, in the particular quality of the quiet between them, something she had spent her whole life watching from the wrong angle, and was now finally watching from the right one. Nora looked up. She saw Josephine. She looked at her daughter in the way she had always looked at her, with the compressed, pressurized feeling that had been there since the beginning and had never fully been able to name itself in any room that the world would have permitted. And then, in that yard, in the April light, in 1871, with no one watching but Pearl, she allowed it to look like what it was. Josephine walked across the yard. She set down the things she was carrying. She stood in front of Nora, and she looked at her. This woman who had bathed her and fed her, and taught her the names of the birds, and the wildflowers, and the way to fold a pie crust at the edge, who had done all of this while carrying every single day the weight of a truth that the world had not been willing to make room for. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "I know who you are to me." Nora was very still. "I know who you are to me," Josephine said again. "And I am sorry it took this long for us to be able to say it." Pearl had stopped working. She was standing a few feet away, her hands at her sides, watching. Nora looked at Josephine. Then she looked at Pearl. Then she looked at the April yard, the turned soil, the thin green lines of early growth just beginning to show in the rows. She thought about what it had cost to get here. She thought about 23 years in a house where everyone knew the truth, but no one was allowed to say it. She thought about all the years of that particular silence and how long a thing can be held before it becomes a different kind of thing entirely. And then she looked at the two young women standing in the yard with her in the April light in the spring of 1871. And she allowed herself to know, in the full uncondensed sense of the word, that she had been their mother every day of their lives, that she had never for a single morning stopped being their mother, and that whatever the world had built to contain and deny that fact, the fact itself had been stronger. It had always been stronger. It had been waiting, patient and solid, for exactly this. The documentary record of the Grayfield case exists in the Freedmen's Bureau records held at the National Archives in Washington. The testimony of Pearl, Hattie, and Lou, and the personal account of Henry Hale were collected in Adams County, Mississippi between 1866 and 1867. Patrick Corbin's personal papers, donated to a Vermont Historical Society in 1908, contain his private account of the interviews conducted during his tenure. In them, he wrote about Nora's testimony. She told me exactly what had happened, in the exact sequence, with the exact weight of each detail. She did not deviate from the facts to make them more bearable or more terrible. She trusted me with the facts as they were. That is a form of courage I had not encountered before and have not encountered since. He kept the copy of her testimony in his files until his death in 1903. Some things cannot be sealed in a locked cabin. Some things find the window.